Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and this is Superhero Rewind.
And he's not afraid.
The best thing I can say about Ang Lee's Hulk is that it's ambitious. Ang Lee wanted to make Hulk into a Greek tragedy. He wanted it to be a character study about a man doomed by his own nature and by decisions made before he was born. He wanted to create something out of a comic book idea that was much more than a brainless action picture. Though it has its action scenes, and some of them are quite spectacular, it manages to come off more as an art house film than a summer blockbuster. I would even go as far as to say that he was trying to validate the medium of comic books to an audience that might not understand them. Does he accomplish all of these goals? Yes, to varying degrees. Does it make for good cinema? In many regards, no. I don't like Hulk so much as I respect it, and perhaps I'm even fascinated by it. There's a lot of passion and good ideas here, but I think those goals greatly overshadow the story. Once again, we have a superhero origin story. It's about how Bruce Banner becomes the Hulk for the first time, how he copes with it, and how the government and the people in Bruce's life respond to it. The strange thing is, it's a superhero origin, but it's not really a superhero movie. Naturally, the Hulk is a strange kind of superhero, even in the comics. Sometimes he's just a rampaging monster, sometimes he's a full-fledged superhero with Banner's intellect intact, and then there's everything else in between. But this isn't the story of a hero, it's the story of a victim. Bruce's father passes a genetic mutation down to his son from an experiment he did on himself, which ruins Bruce's life in a number of different ways. He's a victim due to not being raised by his birth parents, both of whom he thinks are dead for most of his life. He's a victim because his traumatized childhood has made him emotionally reserved and unavailable, which of course destroyed his love life with Betty. And then when the inevitable Gamma accident transformed him into the Hulk, he's a victim because he can't help but turn into the Hulk whenever he gets angry and risk hurting anyone around him, including Betty. It's all tragic, yes, but is Bruce Banner a sympathetic protagonist just because life never deals him a fair hand? After all, what's important in a story isn't what happens to characters so much as how they deal with that. We're supposed to feel bad for Bruce, but after a while, I find myself wanting to see him trying to work past his problems, and that moment comes far too late in the movie for me. It may be a tragedy, but that doesn't mean characters shouldn't be proactive. Hamlet is a tragedy too, and Hamlet himself has clear problems, clear goals, and he tries to accomplish them. Even in a story with a really sad ending, it's hard for me to care about all the bad things that happen to someone who doesn't get or take the chance to solve his problems. And it's hardly Bruce's fault. Through most of the movie, he's either transformed into the Hulk or he's imprisoned by the government. Even in a tragedy, I want to see the protagonist somehow as a hero, or at least as someone trying to be a hero. As the Hulk, Bruce has the power to kill a lot of people, so at the very least he should be desperately wanting to find a way to reverse or control the Hulk. Sure, he tries to control his anger, but that's hardly proactive. If you knew getting angry would turn you into a giant monster that would ruin every outfit you put on and cause a lot of property damage, you'd try to control yourself also. This Bruce Banner is too internalized for me. I'm not saying he doesn't care about people, but he doesn't really talk about it. He seems to want two things. He wants to be with Betty, and he wants to find out about his past. It's all about him. He has a lot of dialogue about how it feels to be the Hulk, how it's empowering, how it gives him immense freedom. But how does he feel about what the Hulk does? He says that when he turns into the Hulk and totally loses control, he likes it. Does that scare him? Is he worried about who might get hurt besides Betty? He seems to be losing his identity, afraid that the Hulk is just who he is, and there's nothing he can do about it. Which leads me to what I think is the most interesting idea in the movie. There are a lot of themes that can be expressed through the man becoming a monster scenario, but Ang Lee does something with the Hulk that I find both original and kind of risky. Bruce Banner and the Hulk seem to be a metaphor for bipolar disorder or some other mental condition due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. Bruce has a lot of things in common with some people who need psychiatric help. He has a traumatic past and repressed memories and a complex and unhealthy history with his father. He bottles up his emotions and can't control his anger when it hits a certain peak. The Hulk itself is a physical representation for the actions taken when having a bipolar or manic depressive episode. When he's the Hulk, he does things he regrets later, and afterwards he internalizes everything, talking about how when he has an episode, or rather when he's the Hulk, he likes the mental instability. It makes him feel powerful. He doesn't want to control it. But of course, when he's in a more calm and collected state, he realizes the repercussions and he regrets it. After David Banner six the mutated dogs on Betty and the Hulk fights them off, she has her father take Bruce into custody. She doesn't want to do this, but she thinks it's for his own good. This strikes me as a representation of taking a mentally unstable person to a psych ward. She doesn't want to give him up to someone else, but she recognizes he needs help and that her own safety is at risk. Bruce's mutated DNA combined with the gamma radiation is the chemical imbalance, meaning that while he has such a traumatic past, his condition is not his fault. Betty's father is the protective father who thinks there's no hope for the mentally unstable person who's in a relationship with his daughter and that being around him is both physically and mentally unhealthy for her. He may sympathize with Bruce to a point, though he hardly shows it, but ultimately he sees Bruce as a hopeless nutjob and wants him put away. And this might be taking the metaphor too far, but the government might represent the psychiatric community. Psychiatrists might sometimes be as interested in studying their patients as they are in helping them, like the psychiatrist who talks to Rorschach in Watchmen. Rorschach doesn't like him because he isn't really interested in treating him so much as he is in getting famous for rehabilitating a famous criminal. Here, the government has its own agenda too. It wants to study the Hulk to see if there is any potential in creating a weapon based on him. So the mental instability idea is really interesting to me, but it also makes for a really depressing and really brooding narrative and takes the fun out of what a lot of people probably expected to be an entertaining superhero movie. So while I appreciate that a lot of time and care went into this complex psychology, it really is a humorless film, and it demands a lot of energy and patience from its audience. I like the parallel between Bruce and Betty's fathers. Both men use their children to get what they want. Both are emotionally and physically distant. Betty rarely sees or speaks to her father, and Bruce thought his father was dead. Both keep secrets from their children, and most importantly, both want control of their children. Despite their both being adults, each of these men sees himself as being in possession of his child. David Banner sees Bruce as nothing more than a continuation of his experiment. After all, he tried to kill Bruce when he was a child, fearing he had created a monster. But now, 30 years later, and since Bruce has become the Hulk, he wants to use Bruce for his own purposes. General Ross wants his daughter to stay away from Bruce Banner. Of course, he says it's for her own protection, but often he seems more bent on controlling what she does rather than making sure she's okay. After all, he only ever calls or sees her when he needs something from her. It's debatable whether either of these men truly loves his child. The wonderful irony is that these two fathers hate each other and are in fact each other's nemeses. General Ross is the one who shut down David's research after the government told him he couldn't have human trials. Ross mistakenly thought David was still working on that project when he was, in fact, trying to cure his son of the mutation he passed down to him. Ross is also the one who locked David up for 30 years after he accidentally murdered his wife. I love this juxtaposition, but it's a shame these two men never have a scene together during the scenes in the present, as the rivalry is actually more interesting than the conflict between Bruce and his father, or even the conflict between Bruce and the General. So those are the ideas that I really latched onto and found interesting, but there are a lot of things within them that don't make any sense to me. Number one, why does David consider Bruce to be a monster who needs to be destroyed before he becomes the Hulk? When he finally reveals to Betty what happens, he acts like he tried to kill Bruce because something about him really scared him. I didn't really see any evidence of this in the flashbacks. This cute kid plays with stuffed dinosaurs and has them fight each other. That doesn't really mean he's going to be a serial killer. Number two, why is David let out after 30 years? The guy murdered his wife, and General Ross seemed to have all the power in whether he stayed in jail or was set free. Why ever let him out, especially since Ross thought the guy was a psycho and a danger to everyone? It's really convenient that he's set free days before Bruce Banner gets hit with the gamma radiation and becomes the Hulk. Speaking of the gamma radiation, the movie makes a big deal out of David Banner turning his son into a freak, but from what I can tell, the only thing that makes him different at all is that he can withstand gamma radiation and it transforms him into the Hulk. What are the odds that a person would ever be exposed to gamma radiation? Betty says that he shouldn't have survived the accident. So basically, he feels victimized by his father for passing on a mutation that actually saved his life from a freak experiment he should have died from. Never mind that it has the unfortunate side effect of turning him into the Hulk. He survived. Again, I don't understand how Bruce's DNA made him any different from other people before this. His emotional distance and any social problems he might have could easily be chalked up to a traumatic childhood that naturally comes with repressed memories since he saw his father kill his mother right in front of him. Number four, what the heck is happening in the last 20 minutes of this movie? Everything from the moment Bruce and his father meet again is a giant question mark for me. First, I don't get why General Ross would grant any request from his arch nemesis. He hates David Banner. The man's a murderer, and he played God with science. Oh, and let's not forget he sicked Hulk dogs on the guy's daughter. Yet he allows him to see his son one more time. We're not told why, except for a scene where David begs Betty to talk to her father to make this happen. We never see her make this request to General Ross, and we're never told if that's the reason Ross lets it happen. So it really seems like just a contrivance to get Bruce and David together so the big climactic fight scene can happen. Second, what exactly is it David wants? He rambles on about hating the government and its rules, which kind of comes out of nowhere. He says that he and the Hulk can destroy society as if for some reason he wants the world to go back to some purely primal state. He doesn't talk about any of this earlier in the movie, and he's only going on about it now that he's hit himself with gamma radiation and has the ability to absorb apparently both energy and matter. The only thing I can figure is that society's rules shut down his research, and in his twisted mind, that forced him to try to kill his son, but he accidentally killed his wife, who he says is all that ever mattered to him. So he blames society for the death of his wife. But he never says that, so I'm not sure what his deal is. Third, how is the Hulk more powerful than David Banner? This is weird. He ends up with the power to absorb anything around him. How is becoming a big giant monster more powerful than that? He wants to absorb the Hulk, and he's beaten when he tries to, but the Hulk's power is too much for him to handle. I don't get any of this, not even a little bit. Not only does he have a more useful and more devastating ability than the Hulk, but he passed his own mutation down to Bruce. So wouldn't that make the mutation more prominent in his own body than it is in his son's? Doesn't seem to be. If I'm missing something here, I'd love it if somebody would let me know. So there are some confusing and hackneyed plot points, but again, not altogether terrible ideas. The movie, for the most part, looks great. Like I said, it's shot like an art film, so the photography is beautiful. I like the sense of scientific curiosity and wonder a lot of the cinematography brings to the movie. Danny Elfman's score goes a long way to creating that ambiance as well. The action scenes are well integrated and have a real sense of scope. This is the comic book Hulk, not the Lou Ferrigno Hulk. He can jump thousands of feet in the air and rip tanks apart. It's fun to watch him take out helicopters and jump huge distances. A lot more takes had to be shot than is usually done in a movie because Ang Lee needed so many different angles to make the comic book panel concept work. I found this idea to be really distracting when I first saw this. There are some movies like Blade that really feel like a comic book brought to screen in style and in atmosphere, but this movie is literally trying to be a comic book on screen, with panels and everything. It looks really neat a lot of the time, but I question if it really enhances the narrative or if it's a little bit gimmicky. After all, panels in a comic are meant to tell a story. For the most part, the panels show a progression of scenes in a linear fashion so you can tell what's happening from one moment to the next. They don't usually show you the exact same scene from 4 different angles. I do like that they aren't just symmetrical squares and rectangles. They're often actually laid out a lot like a comic book page. But it was hard for me to take seriously at first, since multiple frames on one screen is usually a technique used for kitschy spy shows. They get in the way sometimes, and I think that's the opposite effect Ang Lee meant for them to have. He's trying to create a very serious movie that happens to also be a comic book, to show people that comics can have weight, depth, and meaning. But I'm afraid that to a general audience it might come off as a silly device to remind people that this was supposed to be a comic book movie. And really, most of the problems with this movie are exactly that. It's trying too hard. It's trying to look like a comic book, so it goes overboard. It tries to be brooding and depressing, so it's too heavy, and it's hard to like or care about the characters. It just takes itself a little too seriously. I really like the scene right at the end where Bruce Banner confronts some guys who are trying to stop some medicine from getting to those who need it. He's being proactive now. He's using his condition to help people. It's also a nice conclusion to the metaphor for the mentally unstable person, because he's cut ties to the people that his condition was hurting, and now he's trying to put his life back together and make something out of himself. This is the problem with a whole lot of superhero origin stories. The whole thing feels like setup, and it feels like we're just getting to the good part right when it's over. The risk you run is that there might not be a sequel, or maybe there will be a reboot which glosses right over the origins so we can have a fun Hulk story. I'm going to give Ang Lee's Hulk a 2 out of 4. Every single aspect in this movie had something I really liked or found fascinating, and then something else I really just didn't think worked at all. I am pleased to say that it fosters a lot of thought and consideration, which makes it worth seeing.
Ba, ba.